Hey, everybody, and welcome to Navigating Now. This is episode 292. I am your host today, Nicole Deal, an associate director here at Thaudium. This is our virtual roundtable series, and I'm so excited to bring Ryan Terry on the line today. He is a VP of Consulting and Strategy with Educational Resource Systems, ERS for short. So if you hear us saying that, that is exactly where he spends a good amount of his time. So we'll do a little intro of who Ryan is, why we have him on the line today to talk about all things leadership and some of maybe the challenges and tensions we're struggling with in leadership and in learning. So Ryan, welcome to the table. It's good to have you.
Thanks so much for having me, Nicole, and thanks to the Thaudium team for inviting me on.
Yes, and I want to provide our listeners kind of how we came about our connection. So we were both at the an L10 conference. For those who don't know, and correct me if I'm wrong with this acronym, Ryan, Life Trainers and Educational Provider, no, Network. Excuse me. I think it keeps changing the acronym. It was different a few years ago, but
I'd say you're pretty much right there. It's funny enough, and this is coming from my colleagues who have
yeah.
been going to the greater L10 network of events for like decades now, but it's changed its name a few different times over. So I think everyone's kind of come up with their own version
Sure.
of the full name.
Well, I'd love to know because you're specifically in learning for life sciences, and Thaudium is a little bit more broader, but we're trying to get into the conference space, see what's out there, what's happening in other industries. We work with a few companies within like biopharma, et cetera. But would love to hear, VP of Consulting and Strategy. What does that mean for you, and what's it like working at ERS? And then we'll kind of dive into some of the tension points that we're going to have as our focus today.
Awesome. Sounds great to me. Well, just for a little bit of background on me, my role, and my time with ERS. So I actually just celebrated my 11th year anniversary back in May of this year. So I've been with the
Congratulations.
company for some time. Thank you. Really joined ERS at the ground floor. I was more of an event or project coordinator on our promotional med ed side of the house. So that was working with a lot of our KOLs through advisory boards, train the trainers, speaker bureaus, product testing and feedback, that sort of thing. Much more of the, I'd say, not busy work, but felt a little bit more transactional, creating a lot of spreadsheets, as we all seem to do when we first get our start. But then I moved over to more of a true project manager role on the sales training side of our house and supporting a lot of our VPs and our sales directors. From there, moved into what I call like a hybrid role. It was a project management and account management role, sort of acting as a liaison between our key accounts and our internal stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
And then most recently into an account director and then VP level role. The strategy side of my title really comes into making sure that our clients realize that this isn't a transactional service or support line that we're looking to provide here. We really want to be a thought partner. We want to look at or help them uncover really what's most critical from a training needs standpoint, what challenges in the field they're looking to solve for.
Mm-hmm.
And we do that with a variety of different pharma and biotech companies, big and small, across their commercial, med affairs, and market access teams.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a pretty wide array of client partners that we're partnering with, but then also their end audiences or the learner audience that we're training for.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine over the 11 years, even though you've worn like different hats, you still have gotten to grow more intentional like partnerships with your clients to your point, not so transactional, but trying to get ahead of what they might need. This idea of we talk about strategic empathy with our clients. It's like, okay, they say they want this, but how can we give them what we think they actually need, and just kind of checking in with them. But it's hard to do. And I think this is a good segue to the title of our episode today. It's hard to do when everything is urgent. because nothing at the end of the day can actually be urgent. And I know we're going to talk about how that shows up as learning professionals, because we want to practice what we preach and invest so much in our, we invest in the end user and their development. But how often are we losing sight of those that we work alongside, even ourselves in our own development? So would love to just kind of dive in if that works for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. So I think the topic is like this urgency culture that we're all experiencing. Again, if everything's urgent, nothing can be urgent. What does that mean for you, and how does that kind of show up in your day to day with your team?
Yeah, of course. And I'd say that throughout this discussion that we're having here, there's two sort of themes or like friction points that I've identified, and I'm sure many others in similar roles and really just kind of across organizations as a whole, you definitely feel a sense of. One is, if everything's urgent, nothing is urgent. We'll dive into that in a sec. And then also the piece of, the best of intentions and knowing what the most optimal outcome is for a particular task or responsibility that you're looking to address or fulfill. Like, the best of intentions really don't mean anything at the end of the day if you didn't have the time or bandwidth
Mm,
to be as thoughtful and effective in your preparation, your coordination. Like, that's huge. So we're going to kind of touch on both, but those are really the two underlying themes here, I'd say.
great. Which one do you want to start with first?
I think if everything is urgent, nothing is urgent. Just kind of like breaking that into, in terms of my day to day, what that looks like, and I'm sure many would be able to identify some parallels in their day to day responsibilities. But it's like, if you have a big meeting coming up, let's say you're on the agency side, you're going to be meeting with a client of yours. Doesn't matter the industry, but you have a big call coming up. You want to get ready for that call. Maybe you're putting some slides together, maybe some sort of talk track. You want to really be thoughtful, not only in how you're presenting, but what you're presenting for, and maybe
Mhm.
what you're trying to uncover or solve. So ideally, I would give myself a few days, depending on the size of
Ideally.
the opportunity. Right.
Yep. Yep.
But then a few days quickly turns into a few hours, if not a few minutes, when you start receiving, urgent emails, subject line, immediate attention, response required, like anything like that. And we all get it. And
Mhm.
oftentimes those things are, in fact, time sensitive in some way, shape, or form. But after a while, your time that you had budgeted to prepare for this big meeting coming up quickly dwindles down to nothing. And then you're left with showing up to this meeting with, maybe just sort of like the foundational knowledge that you have. Maybe you pulled some things together, bits and pieces. Maybe you got everything in the same place in the slide deck, let's say, but you don't really have a good story that ties all of this information together.
Mhm.
And that feels, at least to me, that feels like you're doing the client potentially an injustice or disservice by not coming as prepared as you wanted. And the point is, it's really a domino effect. So let's like follow those dominoes and figure out where the first domino was tilted or tapped,
Mhm.
and determine, like, was that initial urgent email in fact urgent? What did that do to everyone else who was working on things that may or may not have had enough time budgeted? And then what does that do to all of your cross-functional partners? Turnaround, let's say, for clients. Like, it's a very dynamic butterfly effect, or
Mhm.
domino effect, at the end of the day.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, because we're in client services, almost everything again just feels urgent because you have different clients that you're trying to meet the needs of. You work with a lot of different internal stakeholders as well. Where do you start? How do you begin to prioritize if everything is coming at you with the same headline or, the same request?
That's a great question. At the end of the day, there's really no, um, you know, one thing or one skill is like a fix all or will magically create all of the bandwidth or return your time back to your calendar. Like it's not one thing. It really comes down to honestly a judgment decision.
Mm-hmm.
And judgment is something that I'll put it this way. And I kept trying to think of these like parallels or similarities that you feel when you're growing up or maybe you're going through university and you're studying for a test. You could study a textbook from cover to cover and know it inside and out. But if the final exam turns from a question-based exam into a presentation or application style exam where now
Mm-hmm.
you're looking to use that knowledge
Mm-hmm.
to solve for or accomplish a new task or responsibility, it doesn't automatically mean just because you know the textbook that you're going to be able to execute or apply that information
Yeah.
as effectively as you could.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. The skill of critical thinking, I think, is one that wasn't really on our topic of discussion, but it is a meaty one and it's important because I think even with AI, like we're losing our ability to critical think. And it makes me think of I was in like an honors biology class in college. And I remember like studying really well for one of it was everyone takes a class where you have to learn about the cell and all the parts, pieces and parts. And then I remember getting some questions on the exam that asked, okay, so if this person is experiencing this sort of illness, what do you think it's tied to? And I'm like, I didn't read that in the book. What do you mean? How am I supposed to up with that answer? I don't know. And it does show up. It shows up today in our day to day, but we're not creating enough space to actually have that like higher order thinking.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And just kind of tying it back to the comment about, it really comes down to judgment or critical
Mm-hmm.
thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I'll use
Discernment.
judgment
Yeah.
just to keep it plain. Discernment is that if you aren't making that judgment call to say, hey, listen, client or stakeholder or partner of ours, you're going to have to give me a moment while I either prepare what you're asking for and also wrap up what I'm working on. It really kind of comes down to setting expectations. And I think that's something, especially, and I'm not sure if you feel this, Nicole, but like it's sometimes tough to set those expectations when you're on the agency or supplier side of the house,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like everything feels as though it needs to be immediate. It needs to be almost like an instant or urgent turnaround, response, answer. So it's difficult to set those expectations. And I think that slowly but surely sort of compounds itself, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
next thing you know, it's like everything is urgent and you're not spending as much quality time or providing that level of thoughtfulness and value in what you're delivering because you didn't have the time to.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm. It's definitely something we experience in leaders in some programs that I'm working with across a few different industries. They're running into this too. And the best perspective that I can bring is if the timeline is shorter or they're asking for X number more requests than anticipated, can you agree on like what 80% looks like? Like, can we agree that if these are all the things that you're asking for now, timeline is shorter, this is what we can deliver as opposed to assuming it can be 100%? But that's not an easy conversation to do. My
it's
hunch
not
though is you have
ever.
like trusted partners, you've been at the company for a very long time. How does this show up, like these sorts of conversations? Are you having them often? Are you teaching other people within the org of how to have them effectively?
Yeah. So, and when I think about my day today and what I continue to work on, for myself and my responsibilities, and really not only because I'm thinking about like my my own time and sanity, but
Mhm.
also my teams, because I know they can only be as effective as the guidance, direction, background information that I provide to them is. So if that's getting shortchanged, then I would be crazy to expect anything more than that level of, time or I guess quality, let's say.
Sure.
So it really comes down to thinking about, or taking a step back, taking a breath, thinking about how to delegate strategically, thoughtfully, who to pull in when. And a lot of that I think really comes with not only, the standard structures that may exist in an organization, but being much more thoughtful or tailored with how you're setting not only like expectations around, solo responsibilities, but also like expectations around how do you collaborate with your internal team?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What, and that comes down to everything from turnaround time, who to pull in when, what sort of support can you ask them for? Does that fall into their purview, or do you need to look elsewhere?
Mm-hmm.
And if you do all that in a succinct, well scheduled, in best case scenario, format, like you should get exactly what you're looking for, if not more.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate your emphasis on taking a breath or like taking a beat. Because I kind of look at this urgency culture from like a neuroscience lens when if we think about like our brain when we perceive threat, right? And sometimes this urgency, this like
Yeah.
stress, just compounds itself. We're instantly like, okay, I need to get rid of this. And the quickest way I can get rid of this threat or this feeling of like pressure and anxiety is just to do the thing. Sometimes you have to like lean in, just execute, get the thing done, and then it's off your plate. But then you're shortchanging the opportunity to have other people step in, and you're just, your plate continues to grow even more full. So how does maybe like the role of like coaching and delegation like show up for you now? How is like ERS maybe going about that?
So at the end of the day, you got to I always have to remind myself, we all have to remind ourselves that like oftentimes the work that would create more capacity, more bandwidth is oftentimes the work that is always first to get deferred or knocked to the side
Mm,
when everything's urgent or pressing, right? So again, that sort of like exacerbates or compounds the issue. What we've learned to do is not only from a um, kind of general collaboration framework or process, but like thinking through who not only has maybe the greatest depth of expertise around a particular learning type, or in our space the disease state or therapeutic area, but also thinking about like who truly has the most bandwidth to a point, who do we feel like works best with us as it relates to not only like the internal prep and development, but also like who shows up the best or in the most strong fashion when it comes to like presenting them to the client, having them part of the client conversations, or and maybe they're a phenomenal blank writer, instructional designer, you name it, like they could be incredible, behind the scenes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that translates to being like a phenomenal presenter. So just being respectful of that, respectful of everyone's kind of comfort zone around, different stages of the business development process.
mhm.
So I think that's a huge piece.
Yeah, I hear like tap into the strengths so everyone can just do the job that comes naturally to them. And there's a little bit of, okay, maybe this person has motivation, but they don't have the experience doing this thing. So finding ways where we can almost let them fail first. Is that like I'm hearing that more as like a phrasing, and it's kind of hard to wrap your head around, but we don't really get a lot of opportunities, especially if everything's urgent. Where do we have
Right.
space to like play around in the sandbox and do some iteration?
Yeah, it's like the whole failing upwards or like drinking from a fire hose as like a
Mhm,
way of passage, right?
mhm.
Like so many of us are used to that, have heard that from our leaders, and we see that with a lot of the our direct reports, let's say. but it kind of comes down to thinking of, if you expect, or if you truly believe deep down, and I don't think this is the case, but if you believe deep down that the best way to learn is, the baptism by fire, drinking from a fire, there's a million different adages and expressions for this, but like the learning curve is only going to get deeper and wider the more you set that sort of like, oh, they'll figure it out expectation or like approach to learning. So I think as an organization for ERS, and I see this with a lot of my clients too, is being thoughtful or more so intentional in creating those coaching opportunities, being a mentor, and making sure that you're coming across not as a, hey, I want to see if you're doing things right for the sake of evaluating or assessing you.
Yeah.
But coming in, it's like, hey, if we're all on the same team, and let's just I always grew up playing team sports. So like, if you use your organization as a sports team here, you as an individual can only get so much done by yourself. If your team isn't playing up to their potential, then that's going to weigh down the whole team. Same thing with if you're not living up to or playing up to your potential. So like being there as a thoughtful team member and thinking through like, is this the right fit? Do you have the bandwidth? What can I do to give you, better guidance or more actionable insight? Like you need to have those conversations, because at the end of the day, if you don't, it's a let's fail upwards and hope they read expectation. Or
I was going to say, let's just all assume we're mind readers and life would be a lot easier, but reality,
gosh,
not so
right.
much. Not so much.
Totally.
How does it, like, let's talk about maybe this, because I want to talk about the dynamic you play with practicing like what you preach with
Right.
investing in like learning for your clients. How does that maybe translate into like the coaching world internally? Tell me a little bit about that dynamic.
So I have the pleasure of working with many incredible leaders of L&D, many of whom are responsible for all learning audiences in their organization or different divisions of the organization. So they have a lot on their plate. But one thing that stands out very quickly and clearly is if they have the passion for thoughtful, impactful training and what that usually involves. The point at which that oftentimes falls short is when, and I'll use sort of a general example that comes up fairly often. I'll be speaking to a longtime client of mine, and we're uncovering maybe what some of the challenges are in the field, trying to identify some learning gaps. Hey, we just rolled out this great series of e-learning modules to the team, or some sort of micro-learning, super engaging training tool. Awesome. Sounds great. How are they doing on that content? Great. They know it inside and out. What challenges are you noticing, or where are things falling short? Well, they're having trouble applying that knowledge in the field, or they're really getting tripped up when a healthcare practitioner or some sort of external account or external stakeholder presses them about blank. So that kind of goes back to the whole, if a textbook cover to cover, that doesn't necessarily mean that you know how to apply it, right? Mm-hmm. So oftentimes, and this is where I really wanted to unpack, I think, the root issue here as it relates to a lack of that coaching or mentorship or guidance, and also just kind of from a general organizational efficiency and effectiveness standpoint, is like, we talk about how great these modules or these, self-paced learning deliverables are. Awesome. Maybe we've done some workshops that are delivered virtually. Maybe there's some classroom decks that are presented. Okay, cool. How are the managers coaching the reps out in the field? Well, they'll do a ride along maybe once a month, or They have a standing 15-minute call once a week. Okay. Could we potentially intervene and schedule, be very intentional about like a 45-hour, 2-hour session, maybe every couple weeks, once a month, once a quarter, where it's like we are prioritizing time to coach, and that's it. We're not letting any other distractions, any other outside factors influence or negatively impact
Mm-hmm.
that coaching opportunity. And what we always hear is, oh, I would love that. I know how important coaching is. It would be incredible if we could run this type of program for 4 hours or an 8-hour session. We just don't have the time. We can't take the reps out of the field. But that is like the most, for us, real world example of like sometimes the work that would create the most capacity or the most bandwidth or foster that type of like additional learning and upskilling is just so often deferred or kind of just dismissed, because all they want to see is, we need scripts written now, and that's the only metric of success. So it's tough. It's a tough battle.
Yeah, this term of capability versus capacity comes to mind, where it sounds like you have like a great L&D team who is very capable and supporting your, people out in the field, very capable of coaching, providing feedback. But then this, question of, well, I don't have the capacity. There's no space to do it. So how do we make maybe like mini moments of coaching be realistic? But even then, it's like, is 15 minutes going to be enough? Is 15 minutes better than nothing?
Well, it's funny. It's been a common theme or saying where it's like, it's really challenging to measure, return on investment when it comes to training. You can measure knowledge retention, but how do you measure the true return, if you want to go dollars and cents, on the investment a pharmaceutical company or a biotech made on a full-scale comprehensive learning system? It's really tough to do that. And something that we think about beyond just making sure that they're doing everything in their power to prioritize that coaching opportunity is like, if you think about it, like the cost not to do that would actually outweigh I'll say the cost to do it, or in this case, like the time out of field for the reps, let's say, right? But then taking that one step further, let's, step up the organizational hierarchy ladder one rung here. When you think about like onboarding someone new to the role, it's like, I was looking up some studies that were done, in Gallup, the global analytics firm, had this great paper on what they discovered through their it's pretty much like team engagement metrics. And it says that like 70% of the variance in team engagement is due to the level of participation by the manager. And 2.5 times more new hires say that their onboarding was exceptional when the manager played a direct role in that onboarding. So when you like think about it like that, and you think about, hey, you really only have this finite amount of time during an onboarding curriculum or onboarding process, no other outside factors for the most part. Like, this is the time. And even then, there's very little coaching going on, especially when you think about the managers, associate managers, directors, working your way up the ladder. So it's like, how can you expect the reps to perform to their absolute, peak or the best of their ability if we're not setting those expectations all the way up the ladder? So
And early.
Yeah.
I love that you're bringing in onboarding. One of the sayings we like to say is you don't get a second chance at a first impression.
Right.
And it's so true. And it's the same for, the organization. It's for the manager's role in somebody's career within a company. What would you say to your L&D listeners, if they could do maybe one thing different about like the onboarding experience for their employees, what would you say? One thing.
If there isn't a direct manager or someone that new hire is reporting to, let's say it's more like an agency side, maybe it's sort of a standalone role. I still believe assigning someone, and assigning sounds a little more structured, but organically pairing someone who has X numbers of years of experience in the organization, maybe at the very least just understands the internal, flows and processes. Like just pair them up, make sure or set some sort of regular touch point. And, one thing, not to go down a rabbit hole here, but like we all talk about how something significant that we lost in going to virtual was that ability to like sit down and have a chat with somebody, step next door if you're working in an office, knock on their door and be like, hey, do you have a few minutes? That sort of interaction honestly was sort of that like initial coaching in a lot of ways for these new employees. You sort of had that support system, or at least someone in a supporting role within, a few second walk there. Now it's like, oh man, am I really going to bother so-and-so with a Teams call? It looks like their calendar's booked up till next February. So it's difficult, but I think at the end of the day, it's making yourself available. And if it's not you, figuring out who, because there needs to be some sort of support system in place.
Yeah. Everyone deserves a new hire buddy.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
Everyone deserves to ask the silly questions, and they need someone who can hold space for that and not think it's that silly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So good. Ryan, are there any other things that you feel like if I don't get this off my chest, I'm going to lose sleep tonight that you want to share to our viewers before we wrap for today?
No, I would just say, and I didn't tell my colleague I was going to give him a shout out, but I'm going to give my sales colleague, George Witter, a quick shout out. When I came into a sales role, and it was that hybrid role I mentioned. So I was project managing for George on a couple projects, slowly working my way into more of that account management focused role with those dedicated responsibilities. George, no matter how busy he was, would always make the time, schedule touch points, prep before client meetings and presentations, literally have me practice what I was going to present and give me on the spot feedback, constructive feedback that would help me in a fraction of the time to, resolve or improve on, versus if I had to learn that on my own, like falling flat on my face, potentially risking an important relationship. But then also knowing like how exactly to improve that skill, or what to work on, or what to practice on my own time. That's the thing too. A coach doesn't need to be in the room 24/7 to be an effective coach. Oftentimes that coaching goes hand in hand with being able to like delegate ways to practice, or giving some, tips, recommendations, things to hone in on. That can really go a long way and doesn't necessarily, knock down their bandwidth or their available time.
Yeah, it's this part of, okay, go try this out. Accountability, I'm going to ask you about it later, but sometimes the magic and the learning happens when the coach isn't in the room sometimes.
Yeah.
We need
absolutely.
more Georges. That's one of the
we need more
takeaways.
That's the truth. We need more Georges. But no, just having someone who, even if they're not, calling themselves a mentor or a coach, just portraying that sort of role, or just kind of flexing some of those skills. That's really important in any sort of leader. But especially when I think about, what we do day in and day out and how we partner with our clients, it's like the most successful, effective training leaders are that, because oftentimes they either had a really good mentor, coach, somebody who was at least looking out for them, gave them a nudge in the right direction at the very least. Like those are the individuals who seem to flourish, the quickest and to the best of their availability, or the best of their ability. So Yeah.
I love that. Makes total sense. So, okay, spot coaching, discernment. We've talked about the roles of those two things. Also, how important onboarding is and doing internal learning and development for ourselves, not just practicing what we preach is another way that I want to say that. Anything else as a headline that you want to leave our guests with, Ryan, before we close today?
Again, I don't think it's ever been a lack of intention. I think a lot
Hmm.
of leaders have the intent. It's prioritizing that time.
Yeah,
So I would just say, as a sort of a general thought starter for everyone in our industry, our space, and beyond, like, if you don't prioritize that coaching, you can't necessarily prioritize deadlines or the quality of deliverable or such. So it's really like thinking about that internal ramp up time and what you're willing to spend to get there in the here and now versus down the road. So
totally. The domino effect. Let's,
yep.
yeah, let's be more intentional of if and when that's actually happening in the role coaching plays.
Yeah.
Like that. Well, great. It's been such a pleasure hosting you, Ryan. Thank you so much for
Pleasure's
your
all mine, Nicole.
time.
Thanks.
And to our viewers, this was episode 292. I was on the line here today with Ryan Terry. We talked about how if everything's urgent, nothing can be urgent, and what it means to bring more true feedback conversations, coaching to the forefront, and how important it is to onboard people intentionally because that makes a better ripple effect moving forward. So today and every Thursday, you can find us at 3 p.m. Central at thaudium.com/live. We look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks so much.